Hello and welcome, word enthusiasts, crossword fans. I like the term word nerd. I don't know if you're okay with that, but I love it. Welcome to Alta Live, fellow word nerds. I am so happy to see you all here joining today's discussion with the smart folks who construct Alta's crossword puzzles. If you're a crossword fan, an acrostic fan, if you do Wordle, if you do kind of any kind of puzzles, this is the conversation for your lunch break today. I am psyched to have it. I'm excited that you're joining us. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor and your host for today's event. The concept here at Alta Live is to take an article or subject from our magazine and expand upon it in a live interview. Today, we're going to talk with Rebecca Goldstein and Rafael Musa, who work together to create Alta's crossword and acrostic puzzles. We're going to talk a ton about this today, but if you haven't picked up your latest issue of Alta, there's a crossword and an acrostic in the back of it. Before we start chatting with them, a bit about our guests. Rebecca is a research scientist working to discover immunotherapies for cancer. She lives with her wife in the Bay Area and started writing crossword puzzles in 2020. Rafa was born and raised in Brazil, but has lived in the Bay Area for 10 years. He is a software engineer and a frequent collaborator with Rebecca on crossword puzzles. Before I dive into our conversation about crosswords, some brief words about this great magazine. Alta is an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. We feature all sorts of kind of fascinating subjects that are pertinent to what's going on in the West, California, and beyond. Our current issue right now, issue 25, is the writer's issue. We've got all sorts of ruminations, examinations, essays, and looks at the process of writing, the people who write. It's a fantastic issue. I hope you check it out. It's for sale online or at your local indie bookstore. We also host free weekly events like Alta Live, monthly events like the California Book Club, in-person events if you're in the LA area. Tonight, we're having a party at Diesel, a bookstore in Santa Monica at 6:30. You're all invited to come to that. So if you're unfamiliar with Alta, you like what we do here, I hope you'll check us out. If you're a regular at Alta Live and you haven't yet subscribed as a member, we're $50 a month. You get a hat, you get 4 gorgeous issues, you get our bookstore guide. Please consider joining us or giving us as a gift to a friend, a fellow word nerd. With that, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions of our guests. Rebecca, Rafa, and I will chat for about 30 minutes and then get to as many of your questions as we can. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today. We'll send you an email with a link to this video, the crossword and acrostic and Alta, and invites to upcoming online and in-person events. It's so great to be here with our community today. I love to see where people are zooming in from. So let us know in the chat. Hello from Novato, California, Marin County. Rebecca, where are you today?
I'm in Albany, California.
East Bay?
Yeah, just outside of Berkeley, tiny little city.
Rafa?
I'm in San Francisco, in the city proper.
The city. All right. Well, hi to Portland, Santa Monica, Larkspur. Hey, everyone. Welcome to this conversation. First things first, I got to ask, Rebecca, you are a scientist. Rafa, you are a software engineer. I'm sorry, Renee, I said $50 a month. Alta is absolutely not $50 a month.
I was about to, interject,
Please
and I thought, should I have said something? I don't know. I started to Google on the side. Like,
no, we are the biggest
Like,
bargain in town. We are worth $50 a month.
For sure.
The price for Alta is $50 a year. Thank you for that very important correction. Hopefully affordable for as many people as possible. Okay, Rafa and Rebecca, you both have, I don't know if this term is okay to use, but day jobs, pretty serious day jobs.
I'm a full-time employee, yes.
Yes. How did you come to start constructing, I understand to be the appropriate term, crosswords? When did this start for each of you? Rebecca, let's start with you.
So for me, it was very early in the pandemic. It was Memorial Day weekend of 2020. And, dark times. And for those of us with these like full-time office jobs, a lot of free time on our hands. My wife, it was an assistant head of school. And so she was real busy, real busy. And I was driving her crazy. And she was like, you need to find something to do. You solve that thing every day. Why don't you see if you can make one, almost to just be like, go find something to do. And so, yeah, I made the first one Memorial Day weekend of 2020. And it quickly spiraled from there.
What about you, Rafa? How did this start for you?
Yeah, I think it was a somewhat similar process. I think I started dabbling a little before the pandemic, and I would make puzzles for like my friends and kind of print them out and like bring them to work or like go to lunch and like have like, oh, hey, I made this crossword puzzle, but they were all really bad, and I didn't really kind of know what the conventions were and like what made good or bad puzzles or whatever. But my friends were obviously very graceful and were like, oh, this is so fun. Like, thank you so much for sharing this with us. But it was a very much like a low-key thing. And I didn't sort of, kind of like pursue it further until like later during the pandemic when I was like, well, like I do have a lot of time now, and so maybe this is worth investing in further. And then that's when I kind of like really dug into it. And honestly, I think the what facilitated that for me was there's a pretty like large, thriving community of crossword people on Twitter. I mean, I guess X, formerly known as Twitter now. And I connected with a lot of people there, and they were very encouraging, and it was really cool to kind of like have these people that I had, kind of admired from afar, been like, oh, I've done your puzzles and you're really good. And to kind of see them interact on social media was really fun. And that kind of like, I think lowered the barrier to entry for me, because it was like, oh, they're just like me. They're just people. I could be one of them one day.
There's
And
a
then, yeah.
crossword community.
Oh,
There's
yes.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Oh yeah.
Very
tell me,
much so.
and so you both, you know, what do we say? Played crosswords?
Solved.
Solved.
Sorry, solved crosswords, um, kind of as a hobby, and then started constructing your own. How did you begin to work together?
Probably a Twitter DM.
Yeah, a
Hey,
lot of crosswords happen on Twitter. So yeah, I think we first probably started, we DM'd each other, and usually what happens is you'll sort of like have some conversation and you'll DM each other about like, oh, like, like this puzzle reminded me of this thing, or like, oh, this puzzle was so great, or like, oh, like, did you solve this or whatever? And then you kind of like build a bit of a rapport with someone, and then if you're both very kind of into puzzles, like that kind of natural next step is to be like, oh, we should do something together. Like this is a fun idea. Like, what do you think? And then it kind of snowballs into a collaboration.
Yeah. And I guess like, Rafa and I sort of have the same amount of puzzle energy, I would say, which is maybe we have big puzzle energy, frankly. And I think that's why our collaborative process has been as productive as it has. A lot of times you'll get into those Twitter DMs with folks, and yeah, you'll make one or two things here or there, but Rafa and I are sort of in the same groove in a lot of ways. So I think we've had 10 this year together. We're just kind of constantly texting ideas back and forth, and it goes well for us.
You both have had crosswords in the New York Times, which, as you were, I mean, I think that most of us probably know that the New York Times is the peak of crossword achievement. To get one's crossword in the New York Times is a very big deal, much less to solve the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle, which is the most difficult. My understanding is you both have worked together on a New York Times crossword Sunday crossword puzzle.
Yeah.
How do you start creating construction crosswords 3 years ago and get in the most legit of legit crossword locations, destinations ever?
I want to offer an insider kind of correction there. Sunday is not the hardest puzzle of the week. This is a common misconception. It's the biggest puzzle of the week. It's 21 by 21. The difficulty is like kind of a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The hardest puzzle of the week, if you ask many people, would actually be Saturday, which is typically themeless, and the clues are real misdirecty and question marks abound. And so Saturday is actually, I think, the hardest difficulty level. Which isn't to say that there aren't hard Sundays, but they're big is their thing.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you get in the New York Times as a relatively new crossword constructor?
I mean, I had a lot of rejections before my first acceptance. Some people get in on their first try, some people 10, 20 rejections. I think my first acceptance was my like 7th or 8th submission, probably. How you get in is it's open. It's an open submission system. Anybody here can make a puzzle and send it in. It's a bit of a mystery to us. I've had things rejected that I thought were really great, and I've had stuff accepted that I was like, this could kind of go either way. For our Sunday, though, I had an idea, and ultimately, for me at least, it was not feasible with the tools that were available to me. And I knew that I needed some sort of help with coding. And so I asked Rafa, who we are, our collaborative process was very much in the nascent budding phase at that time. And I was like, hey, do you think you could help me figure out how to do this? And in fact, he could. And, we went through a few multiple iterations, and we kind of got there. And the puzzle ran on July 2nd of this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Number one. Do you get crossword feedback? As a constructor of crosswords, do you get, solver mail? And what is it like?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of do. There's like, as I said, there's kind of like like this thriving crossword ecosystem, I guess, like on the internet. As you know, the internet has many things, one of which is the thriving crossword ecosystem. And in said ecosystem, there are many places where people sort of like do puzzle reviews and like leave comments about puzzles. And so there is the New York Times has this blog called Wordplay, and they like write a blog post that accompanies every puzzle that they publish. And there's like a comment section in that blog. And so people will often comment there and like sometimes be very kind and sometimes be a little bit less than kind about like their experience with the puzzle. And then there's this other review blog called Rex Parker, who is this guy. He's like an English professor in New York, upstate New York, and he writes a blog post review of every puzzle that the New York Times runs. And people in the comment section there also like leave their kind of thoughts and feelings. There's like a pretty big Discord server where people sometimes like leave commentary. There's Twitter, of course. And so every time I have a puzzle published, I try to like not do this, but I always do, which is like kind of obsessively go through every comment section to be like, what are people saying? Are people liking it? Like, what are people like, like what's the buzz? Like, so yeah, there's plenty of opportunity to sort of like receive thoughts and feedback. But I have to say, overwhelmingly, people tend to be very, kind and nice. But it is funny how sometimes, behind a keyboard, people can be like kind of mean. But over time, if you publish a lot, you learn to sort of take it in stride and be like, oh, this dude is just having a bad day. Like, it's fine. Like, it's just it's
Get a bad day with this crossword and let you have it.
Right.
Can you, one of you or both of you, one of you kind of show us the process of constructing a crossword? I've enabled screen sharing.
Yeah, I'll let Rebecca share her screen, and we can kind of together talk through what the process is. So while she's pulling it up, I guess I'll just like briefly kind of explain how the process goes. So basically, overwhelmingly, people who sort of like write crossword puzzles these days like use software to help them write the puzzles. And what that looks like is that there's software where you can kind of like arrange the grid that you want to build and put in the black squares that you kind of like have, put in like any theme entries that are relevant to your puzzle. And then the software will sort of give you options for like what particular pieces of fill would work in particular slots. And a big part of the work and kind of like the artistry of making crossword puzzles is kind of like sifting through all those options and figuring out like what things would lead to like an exciting and lively and fun puzzle that wouldn't just have like a bunch of arcane vocab and like crosses that wouldn't be fair and that would be very hard to kind of like for a solver to figure out. So
just before I pull this up, I just want to give a big spoiler alert that what I'm going to show is the puzzle from the Alta issue. So if you haven't solved it yet, or you don't want to be spoiled, maybe look away or come back and watch this on the video later. But that's what we've brought for show and tell today. So I don't want to ruin anyone's future solving experience.
They've had a month.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is the software that Rafa and I use. A lot of people use this. It's called Crossfire. And you can see sort of the whole grid here laid out. If you can see the purple, those are sort of the theme entries. And then the software shows you, how many words you have. Typically, crossword puzzles that are 15 by 15, which is the standard size, have a maximum of 78 words. But you might have noticed this puzzle is actually 16 wide. So that imputes that I think you can go up to like 83. And it shows you how many 3-letter words you have and 7-letter words you have. And you can kind of look around the grid like that.
Does
Shows
that
you
matter? Is there like a letter number rule?
So you want to minimize your threes because you're going to end up with a bunch of abbreviations and choppy stuff that isn't super fun. And if you think about it, longer words are more likely to be more interesting and less repeated. If you solve a lot of crosswords, you'll see, era over and over again, and eon and ire and all of these, little pieces of glue that hold the longer stuff together. The longer stuff is likely to be more interesting. It's likely to be multiple words, which as a solver, I think is kind of more fun to come across. So there's no hard and fast rule, but you want to minimize abbreviations. You want to minimize short stuff as much as you can. Yeah, and you can also see, where all of your different letters are in here. But, so we'll kind of skip to the point where we lay out the theme entries, and then we figure out where we want to put our black squares, which, separate the words and get kind of a framework going. You can think about where you want to put black squares intelligently too. If you think about where the letter B appears in words in the English language, you probably find it most of the time at the beginning of a word. So you might want to put a black square there. Where you have S's are usually going to be the end of a word, you might want to have a black square at the end of words. We didn't necessarily do that here. You have to make a bunch of trade-offs, but this was the kind of layout that we got to. And then typically what you'll do is you'll do just like a quick autofill to see, hey, can the software do this by itself? And if it's really struggling, you might want to move some squares around to ease things up. But then as you go through, you kind of have choice of what you can put in to every space. Yeah. And so every crossword constructor's honestly best tool is their word lists, the strength of their word lists and what you're choosing from. So it'll show you you can mouse around the grid, and it'll show you how many options you have for the downs and for the acrosses, and you can kind of go from there. So then you go over to the fill tab, and it starts to think and tell you, this is what will go in, and it'll start to bold. And every word you put in is then going to constrain what the next words can be that go into the grid. So, you typically start in the hardest spaces. And if you actually click best location, it'll show you this is the hardest space to fill. You only have 4 choices of words that can fit here. You can start from there. Some people like to start from the long slots because that's where you can get the most fun, exciting entries in. So I usually try to start from the long slots and get really fun, what we call bonus fill. That's long entries that are not the theme entries. And everything you put in, if I say, oh, okay, like Tribeca, that's interesting. I put that in, and then it forces something else. And you just kind of keep going around and around until you end up with a filled puzzle.
And then do you write the clues?
We do.
Yeah.
So how much editorial control do you get over those?
So it really depends on sort of like, the publication. Generally, the process is you'll send in a filled grid and it'll be clued. And in general, it's like significantly easier to edit a clue than it is to edit a grid, right? Because if there's a particular entry in a grid that doesn't sort of like fit with whatever the editor or the publication has in mind, you can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to get rid of this, because then everything around it has to change. And that's like, you have to basically start from scratch. And so generally, like editors just like won't accept puzzles that have like grid issues that are like sort of like significant. But with clues, obviously, it's a lot easier to edit because you can just change a clue, and that's fine. It doesn't kind of like have a snowball effect. And so yeah, it kind of like really does depend on the publication, and like there's a lot to consider when it comes to cluing, right? There's sort of like difficulty target. So if you're going for like, for example, with the New York Times example you were giving, like they tend to kind of like get harder throughout the week, Monday through Saturday. And so if you're going for a Saturday type puzzle, you're going to want to make the clues like tricky and have a lot of wordplay and be a little bit more oblique. And so in the editorial process, like the editors there are going to try to make sure that you kind of like hit that difficulty target. And similarly, if you're doing a Monday puzzle, which is supposed to be really easy and accessible, like you want to make sure that, you know, everything is kind of like as straightforward as you can kind of possibly make it. And so it really depends. And a lot of it also comes down to sort of how much sort of experience you have with writing clues. There's like, you know, little conventions that we as solvers kind of learn in terms of like clues have to agree with their answers in terms of, you know, tense and number and transitivity if it's a verb. And there's all these like little things that we kind of like pick up on. And it's kind of like the editor's job to make sure that there's consistency with that, and that, you know, you're publishing puzzles that kind of like use the same kind of formatting and kind of like have the clues grammatically work and all that stuff. And so editors will always kind of change that kind of stuff, but you know, in general, you are able to sort of do anything you want with the clues, and it's kind of like the editor's responsibility sometimes to make sure that it just like fits with the publication that is running your puzzle.
Yeah, and they can also have a sense of, you know, they're running a whole week at a time or 2 weeks at a time. And so you send something in based on, I've just made this one puzzle as a standalone thing, and you might think you've written the best clue in the world, but if they just ran that angle yesterday, they're not going to run it again 2 days in a row. So they're kind of incorporating their editing, I imagine, to span the whole week or the whole month or the whole quarter worth of puzzles that they're running to get that novelty. You know, cluing is sort of a sore subject for Rafa and I. We both like writing clues, but you know, we had to write 81 clues for this puzzle. It's kind of I don't know if you know that cartoon that people show about the creative process with like drawing a horse, where you start with like shading and great detail, and by the end it's like a 2-year-old stick figure drawing. So for me, it's very much like I come up with the theme and I agonize and I get it just right and everything lines up great. And I'm like, all right, I have to make a grid. Okay, I got the grid and I filled it and it's really nice. And by the time I get to clues, it's, oof, we can end up in clue holes that are just hundreds deep at times. And it's not my favorite part, but you know, something that has to be done.
What's your favorite part?
I like coming up with themes personally. You know, I hear a phrase and I wonder if I can get it to work in the concept of a theme, or if I can build a theme around it, if it can be the revealer for a theme set. Getting a perfect theme set. And another thing I didn't mention is that your theme entries all have to be symmetrical in length, because crosswords all have some degree of symmetry. This crossword puzzle has rotational symmetry. Sometimes you can get around that restraint by using mirror symmetry or diagonal symmetry. But for me, if I can find a perfect set that has the appropriate symmetry, that's just such satisfaction for me personally.
Rafa, what's your favorite part of
Yeah, it's funny that Rebecca and I in this sort of regard are quite opposite, because she has very good sort of like theme brain and is very like excited about theme ideation and like making themes work. But I am not very good at theme ideation, and I also find themes to be very constraining when like filling grids. And so I feel like it kind of hampers my creative process. And so I'm much more of like a themeless puzzle person, and I enjoy making those puzzles a lot more. So my favorite part of the process, I think, is filling the grid, but for a themeless grid where you really don't have any constraints, right? And so you maybe sometimes you have like a specific entry, like a seed entry that you want to include, and you kind of like try to build something around that. But I really appreciate having like a clean blank slate from which to build. And I think that is kind of like the sort of creative outlet that is the most satisfying to me when I'm working on puzzles.
This is so wild to see how you make this. I had no, like, just seeing that the software that creates this is fascinating. We got a question is there more that you want to show us, Rebecca? Or
no, I can stop sharing so that, you know, folks don't have to be spoiled any longer. They can uncover their eyes, or, you know.
I'm curious. Someone asks here, and it's a great question. Renee Townsend asks, is AI becoming a part of crossword construction? And if so, how do you feel about that?
I've seen some jokey stuff in some of the community spaces that Rafa mentioned. Not for me. Maybe eventually. I know it's sort of like a hot topic. Not for me personally. I don't know, Rafa, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. Like I've tried to like use AI to see like, oh, is it going to be good at this? Like, can it help me like do this? But I have not had like wonderful results really. So like I certainly I think it's the kind of thing where I don't think we're spending sort of like billions of research dollars into making AI good at like creating crosswords, right? Like if we were doing that, perhaps like it would be in a better place, and then it would just be like able to do sort of like the whole process end to end like a lot more. But the state of things right now is like I've sort of tried to use it for, like helping to come up with a theme set, or like even writing clues, or like sort of grid stuff, and it hasn't been particularly helpful. So it's the kind of thing where like, yes, it's there, it exists. And I know everyone says that about like their thing, but there's such a human element to this, right? It's like
Yeah.
everyone says that. Everyone
I
says that.
was
It's like, no, like I can never capture like all the trade-offs and all the like the human sort of like, your familiarity with language and understanding like what things like are going to be exciting and like how to like use wordplay, like all those things are so sort of like deeply human that it just feels like it's not the kind of thing that it's going to excel at. But again, I know everyone says that about their specific job and their specific
Right.
vocation. It's like, no, we're safe.
I think that's true. I think there's also an element of crosswords that they're in English, at least American crossword puzzles are, but they're not exactly English. There are certain, diction things and grammar things where if you look at like the syntax of crossword clues, they're not sentences. It's usually 2 or 3 words. It's a clue, it's a hint. It's not natural language very often. And sometimes even with clue writing, you'll go for a misdirect or a pun or a question mark clue. And if it doesn't sound natural, you can't use it. You can't contort English outside of it. There's a certain narrowness of the language of what sounds normal in crosswords. And it's almost like a fluency. Like I can hear it, but I can't tell you what it is. And it would be hard for me to imagine that AI could figure it out, but maybe I underestimate AI. So I'm very sorry to our, robot overlords.
You both did an interview with an Alta editor, Jess Blau, to zoom in today about this is for social media. You guys follow us on social at Alta Journal. We've got a ton more kind of fun content going on over there on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. But you mentioned American crosswords now and in your interview with Chess. I'm curious if there are there international crosswords that are different somehow? Do they have different rules? Do they look different? Is there a Euro crossword? And does it change depending upon where you are?
Yeah, so crosswords, I think canonically in Britain are cryptic crosswords, in the UK broadly, which is a totally different format of what American crosswords are. So American crosswords have no unchecked squares, which means that every square feeds into other squares. You'll never have a square that stands alone and isn't crossed by other squares. And the clues are in the format that we're used to talking about. Cryptics are just a totally different beast. I don't even know how to begin to explain them, frankly. And I imagine there are probably crosswords in other languages, though I'm personally not familiar with any of them.
Yeah.
Rafa?
Yeah. So yeah, as Rebecca said, like, like I think we generally say American crosswords to distinguish them from cryptic crosswords, which tend to be more sort of popular in the UK and sort of like British vibe places. And yeah, as she was saying, those are like a completely different beast, and the clues have like their own rules and syntax, and it's totally kind of opaque to someone who like isn't in that world. And so if you're interested, like we wouldn't be able to do justice explaining what it is, but like if you're interested, look up cryptic crosswords and you'll see how different it is. It's worth kind of checking out just to be like, wow, like this is so different. But yeah, and there are like I can speak. So as you mentioned in the intro, I grew up in Brazil, and so I speak Portuguese, and Portuguese is my first language. And so I try to like be like, oh, are there crosswords like in Portuguese? And like there are, but they're kind of different. And like yeah, I mean it's all very different, and like the clues will be like in the grid itself, like inside the little squares, and there'll be like these little arrows telling you like where to go. And so all the
Becca
kind of like rules
is
and
having a meltdown.
conventions
That's
are,
freaking me out. It sounds like IKEA almost.
yeah,
Like,
no, it's like it's really weird and like different. And so like, I'd imagine, obviously, like I don't know this for sure. I'd imagine that like, different like languages and countries and cultures like might have their own different types of rules for like when it comes to, like how to like organize words in a grid type thing. But yeah, we generally refer to like an American crossword as like sort of the kind of quote unquote standard like New York Times style puzzle that we're using, the kind of ones that we're making for Alta, like the ones that we're used kind of seeing in like American newspaper publications.
We're running out of time, so I want to sneak in 2 more questions before I let you go back to your day jobs or next crossword. First is and probably a lot of our audience saw a 2006 documentary, Wordplay, about the crossword community that you referenced earlier. Do either of you compete in crossword competitions? What is the crossword competition world like? Is that still a real thing?
it really super duper is. I think I watched the documentary like many, 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 many years ago, and I probably should rewatch it. It seems like a professional hazard that I am not familiar really with the content of that movie at this point in time. The ACPT, the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament, happens every year in Stamford, Connecticut. I was really fortunate that I was able to go, not in this year, but in 2022. I had a family wedding and we were on the East Coast. And so I had, 18 perfect hours in Stamford, Connecticut, where I got to meet all these people that I only knew from online, editors and constructors and friends. And it was great. That is not the only crossword puzzle tournament that exists. There is something called Lollapuzzoola, which is run on a Saturday in August in New York City every year. I went to that this year. I had a puzzle in that tournament this year. It was great. There's also a league that runs. It's called Bosswords, BOSWORDS, and it's organized by a couple of great guys in the crossword community. They used to run a summer tournament, and when the pandemic started and everything went online, they brought their tournament online. Hundreds of people solve, and so it was so popular that now they run themeless leagues. And so they run for 10 weeks in the fall and in the spring. And every week on Monday night, we all hop on Twitch and we watch the broadcast and you solve the puzzle. And I actually solve with a close constructor friend of mine, Rachel Faby, who used to write the Wordplay blog for a few years. And it's a blast. We love it. It's great. It's competitive. And I should also say that we are hosting a crossword puzzle tournament in the Bay Area in June of 2024.
What?
It is called Westwords. I am co-directing it with my colleague and friend Kate Chin Park, as well as a few others. And if folks want to find out more about that, they can go to westwordsbestwords.com to get more information.
Hopefully my wonderful colleague Jess Blau is writing. We will send you a link to that, folks. We will send you a link to that. I mean, I kind of like, what, can Alta do something? We'll talk. That is very exciting. Rafa, do you ever compete or follow this
Yeah,
kind of...
I went to Lollapuzzoola, which is the one in New York that Rebecca was talking about this year, and that was my first one, and it was a blast. I'm not really a competitive solver. I think there's like somewhat of a misconception, I guess, that where like people think that like people who are very prolific crossword constructors are necessarily like very good solvers. Like I'm by no means not even close to a competitive solver. So like I'd never win a tournament like at all, because people are really good at solving puzzles in a way that I am not and kind of will probably never be. Like Rebecca, for example, is a lot faster than I am. Like I'm very fast compared to like a lay person, right? Like if you compare it to just like my friend who's like doesn't really do crosswords, like I'm way faster than them. But Rebecca, for example, is way faster than I am, and then there are several people who are way faster than she is, and so it's like there's a whole hierarchy of like how fast people are. So I go to the tournaments, and they're a ton of fun. And as she was saying, you get to meet all these people that you've like seen online and like interacted with on the internet. But like I'm not going to win, right? Like I'm going just to hang out. Like so but many people do go to win, and that's great. But that's kind of not my journey.
My journey. All right, my last question is this, what your crossword and acrostic for Alta were very popular. In fact, I learned the hard way that we need to get those answers up online the second this magazine hits the first subscriber mailbox. We may have been 24 hours behind. We didn't think the magazine would hit that early. And the first thing we heard about from our readers, from our members, was where are those crossword answers? And we're getting them up immediately. So now that I know, as a back-end person, as an Alta person, how important this is to the readers that do the crossword puzzle, will you ever do another crossword for Alta?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can say that there will be more to come in the next issue.
Fabulous. So the next issue, is this a theme? We can't tell you what I'm not going to tell you what the theme of the next issue is yet. But is your crossword themed to the issue, or is it a standalone?
Yes. Yeah. We get information about what the theme of the issue will be in advance, and we do our best to match the crossword theme to that theme. Hopefully people appreciated in the previous puzzle, the correlation of, it's called what's the word I want? It's like a building type of theme where you go from word to page to chapter to book, which seemed like a very appropriate type of theme for the writer's issue. And so for upcoming issues, we will also try to match to the theme of the issue as much as we can.
Yeah. And it's also cool to be able to sort of write clues that feel, cool and on brand for the particular theme of the issue. And so like, we get a little, as Rebecca was saying, like we get a very broad sense of like what sort of the theme of the issue is, and like specific articles, and like what kind of how it's being explored. And so when it comes to the clue writing process, like sometimes we can kind of inject a little bit of that specific kind of like personality, right, when it comes to that. So for example, for this one, where we knew the theme was like writing, we were like, oh, like maybe we could include like some authors and just like kind of make the clues a little bit more kind of geared toward that broader like theme. And similarly, we tried to do that as well for the upcoming one. And it's like nice to kind of like, have it feel like special and feel like an Alta puzzle, as opposed to just like some generic cookie cutter puzzle that we just
Love that.
publish anywhere.
Yeah, and we can lean into the West Coast stuff, California, and that sort of content as well in the clues.
Rafa and Rebecca, you guys are very cool. I just think this whole conversation is like so eye-opening. Getting to see the back end, the software of how you build this, was really fun. I'm so, as I'm sure our audience is, so grateful that you took the time to share your work with us today. Thank you both so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. And to our audience, thank you for coming. Don't miss next week. We're going to welcome our Ask a Californian columnists, Gustavo Arellano and Stacey Grunrock Woods, where you can bring your Ask a California questions. We're having a very interactive, a very user-friendly Alta Lives coming up. So I'm so excited everyone joined us today. Check your email later this afternoon for more. Rafa and Rebecca, you guys are great. I'm excited to solve your next crossword for Alta. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye.